I understand your proposal. However, there are some discrepancies.
Do you even know what $1 billion looks like? Alexander Whitestone's voice sliced through the air, smooth and sharp as broken glass. Of course you don't, because people like you will never touch that kind of value. The words hung in the vast, sterile air of the Whitestone Holdings penthouse. Half boardroom, half cathedral to wealth. Gold-veined marble floors gleamed beneath chandeliers that looked like frozen rain. Around the long black glass table, men and women in expensive suits stared down, silent, pretending not to flinch. The young maid stood still at the far end of the room. Her gloved hands trembled as she bent to pick up the broken wine glass at Alexander's feet. The crimson stains spread across his white suit like a wound. Amara Lewis couldn't meet his eyes. Her breath caught somewhere in her chest, small and tight, like a bird fluttering inside a cage. I'm sorry, sir," she whispered, barely audible. Alexander scoffed, brushing invisible dust from his sleeve. His blue eyes were glacial. "Sorry doesn't clean suits, miss. What was it again? The help?" The executives chuckled lightly, cautious echoes of their boss's cruelty. Amara swallowed hard. Her brown skin flushed beneath the bright office lights. "Lewis, sir, Amara Lewis." "Right, Miss Lewis. Maybe next time, focus on holding the tray instead of staring at the ceiling." More laughter. It rippled through the room. Small, awkward, cruel. Amara nodded silently, her head bowed. She crouched to pick up the shards. Her reflection in the floor looked foreign, bent, tiny, ghost-like in the empire of men. Alexander turned away, returning to his tablet as if nothing had happened. Now, where were we? The deal with the Tokyo delegation. His assistant quickly began to speak, her voice trembling. Charts appeared on the holographic display, lines, graphs, numbers, all his kingdom, all under our control again. But from the corner of his eye, Alexander noticed Amara lingering, carefully blotting the wine from the carpet with a cloth. Her movements were delicate, precise. She didn't cry. She didn't defend herself. She just worked, as if the humiliation had passed right through her. It unnerved him. For reasons he didn't understand, it bothered him that she didn't react. Outside the penthouse windows, the city pulsed, a grid of gold and motion stretching to infinity. Inside, Amara pushed her cart of cleaning supplies down the silent corridor, away from the glass palace and its invisible thrones. She exhaled slowly, pressing a hand to her heart. The echo of his voice, "People like you," replayed, heavy and poisonous. She'd heard it before, in different shapes, from teachers, landlords, interviewers. Yet she whispered softly to herself, in French this time, "Tu n'es pas ce qu'ils disent, tu es plus que ça." You are not what they say, you are more than that. It steadied her. She entered the staff break room, small, warm, cluttered with faded lockers and a humming vending machine. Tasha, another maid, looked up from her phone. "Girl, you okay? I saw him yelling. What did you do?" Amara gave a faint smile. "Spilled wine, my mortal sin of the day." Tasha groaned. "That man needs therapy and a hug, or maybe a frying pan to the head." Amara laughed softly, the first sound of warmth all day. "Maybe all three." Then silence fell again, but a gentle one. She sat by the window, watching rain streak down the glass, tracing it with her fingertip. In her mind, the words she'd overheard from the meeting replayed. Fragments of Japanese, French, Arabic. She understood every line, every hesitation. Their negotiations weren't going smoothly. The investors were confused, misinterpreting tone and phrasing. She wanted to help, desperately. But she also knew, her place. A maid doesn't speak in boardrooms. Still, what if she could? Meanwhile, upstairs, Alexander Whitestone leaned back in his chair, exasperated. His jaw flexed as his executives stumbled through another attempt to phrase their offer in Japanese. The translator had quit that morning. The backup was delayed in traffic. And tomorrow, billions hung in the balance. "Idiots," he muttered. "How hard is it to learn basic business phrases? I pay you 6 figures for this?" His assistant, Harper, hesitated. "Sir, maybe we should postpone." "No." He slammed his tablet shut. "I don't postpone. I win. Always." Yet as he stared out over the skyline, his reflection in the glass didn't look like a winner, just a man trapped inside his own armor. That night, long after everyone left, Amara stayed behind to polish the conference table. The city lights reflected across its surface like stars. She hummed softly under her breath, a tune her father used to sing when translating poetry for her as a child. She whispered a few words in Italian, then switched to Mandarin, then to Swahili. The languages danced together like music only she could hear. She never noticed Alexander standing in the doorway, watching. He'd returned to grab his forgotten tablet, and froze at the sound. Her voice was low, melodic, fluid. Each word flowed perfectly, naturally, effortlessly. For a moment, he forgot to breathe. When she turned and saw him, she startled. "Oh, I didn't realize. I'm sorry, sir, I was just—" He blinked. What were you saying just now?" Her hands twisted nervously. Just practicing. I like learning languages." He frowned, skeptical. "Which one was that?" She hesitated. Which part?" He blinked. "You mean there was more than one?" Her eyes lowered, shyly. "Yes, sir. 9, actually." He stared at her. 9 what?" "Languages," she said quietly. "I speak 9. For the first time in his life, Alexander Whitestone didn't know what to say. 9 languages, Alexander repeated slowly, as though tasting. Something he'd never believed existed. "You're telling me a maid speaks 9 languages?" Amara stood beside the gleaming conference table, her cloth still in hand, her gaze flickering nervously between the billionaire and the floor. The rain outside the glass walls whispered against the city, muffling the silence between them. "Yes, sir," she murmured. "It's just something I've always loved." Alexander's expression hardened again, like a door slamming shut. "And yet you choose to scrub floors for a living?" The cruelty in his tone wasn't loud, just cold, surgical. But Amara felt it deep, like ice threading into her veins. She steadied herself. "I didn't choose it, sir. I needed the work." "Right." His lips curved into a faint, humorless smile. "The job market must really be desperate if it's wasting polyglots on cleaning duty." He turned away, dismissing her with a flick of his wrist. "Get some rest, Miss Lewis. Tomorrow, try not to ruin any more suits." She lowered her eyes, nodded, and slipped out of the room. Behind her, Alexander exhaled. Annoyed at himself, though he couldn't quite name why. He'd just mocked her again, but this time the satisfaction never came. The image of her, standing there in her worn uniform, composed despite humiliation, stayed with him. Her voice, soft and precise, echoed in his head. Down in her small apartment in Harlem, Amara leaned against her kitchen counter, exhausted. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. On the wall above her table hung a faded photograph. Her father, smiling in his professor's coat, and her mother with her arm around him. She traced their faces with her finger. "I almost told him about you, Papa," she whispered, "but he wouldn't have cared." Still, she could hear her father's voice from years ago, gentle and sure. "One day, Amara, your words will save someone who doesn't deserve it. Nah, that's when you'll understand mercy." She smiled faintly. At the time she thought he meant forgiveness. Now she wasn't so sure. Her phone buzzed, a text from Tasha. "Tasha. Girl, they say tomorrow the big meeting's happening with foreign investors. You gonna be in the room again?" Amara. "Yeah, probably hiding behind a tray." Tasha. "Better keep that tongue ready. Maybe one of those 9 languages can curse him out politely." Amara laughed, softly shaking her head. But as she lay in bed that night, her laughter faded. A strange premonition stirred in her, like something in her quiet, invisible world was about to split open. Morning came with the pulse of skyscraper light. In the white stone tower, the atmosphere was electric. Staff scurrying, translators arriving late, investors flooding the top floor. The Japanese delegation wore impeccable gray suits. The French team arrived all perfume and precision. The Arab investors glided in with quiet confidence. Amara carried trays of espresso and pastries, moving silently among them. Her eyes flicked to the men speaking in rapid Japanese. She caught every word. Their growing impatience with Alexander's misinterpretations, the subtle frustration in their tone. His proposal undervalues us, one murmured. He doesn't even know the proper form of address. Her fingers tightened around the tray. She wanted to speak, to fix it, but fear pinned her. Then Alexander entered the room, sharp as a blade in a navy suit. His confidence filled every corner. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, smiling with that effortless arrogance. "Let's get to business." The meeting began, and quickly, it unraveled. Miscommunication layered upon miscommunication. The translator stumbled, panicked. The Japanese delegation's expressions stiffened. The French representatives began murmuring to each other, while the Arabic investors whispered sharply in their own tongue. Alexander's smile faltered. His empire, his billion-dollar deal, was slipping through his fingers. "Mr. Whitestone," said one Japanese investor at last in halting English, "you misunderstand. We do not agree to these terms. We are insulted." The translator tried to repair the damage, and failed again. Alexander's chest tightened. His team looked at him in horror. The room was seconds away from collapse. Then, quietly, almost like a whisper from another world, came a voice. "Sumimasen," Amara said. "Excuse me." Every head turned. She stood near the wall, tray still in hand, trembling but upright. "If I may," she continued, in flawless Japanese, "Mr. Whitestone did not mean to offend. He only intended to express respect for your company's innovation and hopes for mutual growth." The investors blinked, stunned. Then one of them replied in Japanese, smiling slightly. Amara answered effortlessly, translating both ways, smoothing tone, nuance, pride. Next, she turned to the French delegates, shifting seamlessly into perfect Parisian French. "Messieurs, mesdames, je vous assure que les termes seront révisés avec équité." Ladies and gentlemen, I assure you the terms will be revised fairly. Finally, she addressed the Arabic investors. Her pronunciation crisp, her phrasing poetic. The tension in the room dissolved, replaced by astonishment. Alexander stood frozen. The billionaire who had mocked her hours ago now watched as this quiet, invisible maid saved his empire, with words. When the meeting ended 2 hours later, laughter and applause filled the room. The contracts were signed. The billion-dollar deal, once seconds from disaster, was complete. Alexander barely moved. He watched Amara thank the guests politely before slipping away, head still bowed. One of the investors clapped him on the shoulder. "That young woman," he said in accented English. "She saved your deal. Extraordinary talent." Alexander nodded numbly. "Yes," he whispered. "Extraordinary." After everyone left, he found her again, standing by the staff elevator, her uniform wrinkled, her eyes downcast. "Miss Lewis," he said softly. She turned. "Sir?" He hesitated. The words didn't come easily. "How long have you worked here?" 7 months? And in those 7 months, he said, stepping closer, you never thought to mention you speak 9 languages? Her lips pressed together. "You never asked, sir." Something flickered across his face. Shame, faint but real. "I owe you my thanks," he said at last. "You saved me. You saved this company." She smiled gently. "You don't owe me, Mr. Whitestone. You just needed someone to listen." He looked at her, truly looked at her, maybe for the first time. And for a moment, he saw not a maid, but a person he'd made invisible. That night, as he sat alone in his office, Alexander replayed her words, and his own cruelty. The mirror behind his desk reflected a man he didn't quite recognize. He poured himself a drink but didn't touch it. Somewhere deep inside, something cracked. "You never asked, sir." Those words kept replaying in Alexander Whitestone's mind, looping like an echo that refused to fade. It had been 3 days since the deal was signed, 3 days since that quiet maid had become the reason his empire didn't crumble. Yet the more praise he received from his investors, the heavier his chest felt. He'd won, but it didn't feel like victory. In every photo of the handshake, every headline praising Whitestone Holdings for innovative diplomacy, he could still see Amara standing in the background, barely visible, tray in hand, half turned away from the camera. He hadn't even given her credit, not publicly, not yet, and that was starting to eat at him. "Sir?" his assistant Harper said that morning, stepping into his office. We need to finalize the internal memo about the merger. Should I mention the interpreter issue? Alexander's eyes lifted slowly from the skyline. No, he said. Then, after a pause, actually, yes. Roar. I'd something about team adaptability. Harper hesitated. Team adaptability, sir. Just do it. She nodded and left, puzzled. He sat back in his chair. His reflection floated in the window, the sharp jawline, the tailored perfection, the man who'd built an empire before 35. But now the image looked wrong, tired, human. He exhaled slowly. What's happening to me? Down in the service floors, Amara was mopping the marble corridor when two security officers walked past, whispering. You hear what she did? The maid who saved the boss's deal? Yeah. Some say she speaks like a machine. 9 languages? Come on. Amara kept her eyes on the floor, cheeks flushing. She didn't crave the attention. It made her skin itch, especially when it came laced with disbelief. She'd done what was right, not what was strategic. That was her father's lesson. Use your gifts to heal, not to shine. Still, she couldn't help but feel a quiet ache. Because in all the noise of Whitestone Holdings, not a single person had thanked her sincerely. Not even him. Later that afternoon, she was polishing the mirrored elevator when it dinged open, and Alexander stepped in. Their eyes met in the reflection. Miss Lewis, he said, his tone uncertain. You can stop for a minute. She froze, unsure if it was a command or kindness. Yes, sir? He adjusted his cufflinks, searching for words. I wanted to apologize. Her heart skipped. She blinked. For what, sir? For the other day, the wine, the words, all of it. His voice softened slightly. It was uncalled for. She studied his reflection carefully. His shoulders were still rigid, but something in his face looked raw, unguarded. Thank you, Mr. Whitestone, she said quietly. Apologies are rare up here. He almost smiled. So I've heard. They stood in silence for a few seconds, the hum of the elevator between taunts. Hem. Then he said, Tell me something, Miss Lewis. Why here? You could be anywhere, doing anything. Her eyes lowered. Because anywhere doesn't always open its doors, sir. He frowned slightly. I tried, she continued, voice calm but heavy. After my degree, I applied to over 60 positions. Translation agencies, embassies, international firms. Some never replied. Some said I wasn't the right fit. Some asked if English was really my first language. Alexander's throat tightened. And yet you ended up here. She nodded. Bills had to be paid. Something in his chest twisted. That's unacceptable. She gave a faint, ironic smile. It's the world, Mr. Whitestone. I just live in it. The elevator doors opened, and she stepped out. But before they closed again, she turned slightly and added, For what it's worth. I'm glad I was there that night. Not for you, but for the people you employ. They needed that deal more than you did. The doors slid shut. Alexander stood alone, stunned. That evening he called an emergency board meeting. Effective immediately, he said. Whitestone Holdings is launching a multilingual outreach division. I want our global branches connected through real people, not automated systems, and I want Amara Lewis to lead it. The boardroom went silent. Sir, one executive ventured carefully, you mean the cleaning staff member? With no corporate experience? Alexander's jaw flexed. With 9 languages and a spine stronger than most of you, yes. There were murmurs, disbelief, discomfort, polite protest. But Alexander's tone left no room for debate. She's earned it. Meeting adjourned. When Amara was summoned to his office the next morning, she assumed it was about cleaning duties. She entered, clutching her gloves, and froze at the sight of the HR director and 2 board members present. Miss Lewis, Alexander began, rising from behind his desk. Please, have a seat. Her pulse quickened. Is something wrong, sir? He smiled faintly. On the contrary, something's finally right. He gestured to the screen, a document with her name on it. Appointment, Head of Global Communications Cultural Strategy, Whitestone Holdings. She blinked. This must be a mistake. It's not, he said. You saved this company, and now I need someone who understands the world better than I do. You've earned this, Amara." Her lips parted, but no sound came. One of the board members coughed softly. "Of course, the final approval is contingent on her accepting and on—" He glanced uncomfortably at Alexander. "Appropriate public optics." Alexander's expression hardened. "Optics be damned, she's qualified." Amara stared at him. "Why are you doing this?" He met her eyes, steady now. "Because I was wrong. About you. About people like you. And maybe about myself." She shook her head slowly, overwhelmed. "I don't know if I can—" "You already have," he interrupted gently. "You've led better than most of my managers, just by being decent." Her hands trembled slightly as she looked at the offer. "If I accept," she said quietly, "I'd want conditions." He raised an eyebrow. "Conditions?" "Yes." She straightened, finding her courage. "Every member of the cleaning staff gets full health benefits, and a raise." A small, startled laugh escaped him, not mocking, but genuine. "You drive a hard bargain, Miss Lewis." Her eyes softened. "You taught me well, sir." He nodded, a small smile breaking the ice that had lived in him for years. "Deal." That night, as the city lights shimmered below, Amara sat by her window at home, the same one she'd stared out of for months, and let herself cry. Not out of pride, out of release, out of something she'd carried too long, the weight of being unseen. In another tower across town, Alexander sat alone in his office, staring at the empty chair where she'd sat hours before. For the first time, he wondered if power meant nothing without the courage to admit who'd truly earned it. But their story wasn't done. Because power never changes quietly, and not everyone in Whitestone Holdings was happy about the Maid's sudden rise. And soon, the backlash would begin. "You gave her an executive position?" The voice came from across the long boardroom table, crisp, incredulous, cutting. It belonged to Charles Denton, Whitestone Holdings' chief financial officer, a man whose smile was as polished as his cufflinks. Around him, a dozen senior executives shifted uncomfortably, pretending not to agree too loudly. Alexander Whitestone sat at the head of the table, calm but tight-jawed. "Yes," he said evenly. "Amara Lewis will lead global communications." Charles leaned back, smirking. "With all due respect, Alexander, this isn't charity hour. You're running a billion-dollar corporation, not a halfway house." The room rippled with nervous laughter. Alexander's blue eyes sharpened. "Watch your tone, Charles." But Charles didn't stop. "Come on, Alex, she's a maid. She doesn't belong in this room, much less leading a department. Do you really think she understands the language of business just because she can parrot foreign words?" "Enough," Alexander said quietly, his voice tightening like wire. But Amara was already standing in the doorway. She had arrived early for her first orientation meeting, holding a slim folder against her chest, and she had heard every word. Her breath caught, but she didn't move. Charles noticed her too late. His smirk faltered. "Miss Lewis," Alexander said, rising to his feet. "Come in, please." She did, steady, graceful, though her heart pounded like thunder. Charles cleared his throat. "I was merely expressing concern about experience gaps." Alexander's tone turned to steel. "Then express it to her directly." Charles hesitated, then forced a thin smile. "Miss Lewis, I meant no offense." "You meant every word," Amara replied softly, but firmly. "And that's fine. Words reveal character." The room fell silent. Even Alexander looked momentarily stunned, and then something like pride flickered in his eyes. Amara continued, calm but resolute. "I've spent years being overlooked by people who believe ability wears a suit. It doesn't. Sometimes it wears an apron." She set the folder on the table and met Charles's eyes. "You speak 2 languages, correct? English and Spanish?" He frowned. "Yes." She smiled faintly. "Then you'll understand when I say, el respeto no se compra, se gana. Respect isn't bought, it's earned." A few muffled chuckles came from the junior executives. Charles turned crimson. Alexander's lips twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "Thank you, Miss Lewis," he said. "I believe that ends the discussion." Amara nodded. then excused herself with quiet dignity. When the door closed, Charles slammed his pen onto the table. "You're really going to let her talk to me like that?" Alexander's gaze was ice. "You're damn right I am. Because she's earned the right to be here. Have you?" Charles stared at him, speechless. Later that day, in the executive lounge, whispers spread like wildfire. "Did you hear what she said to Denton? Unbelievable. She's bold. She's reckless. She's brilliant." Amara felt their eyes follow her wherever she went, some curious, some admiring, some cruel. But she walked with quiet composure, in a new black blazer gifted by HR, her natural hair free and shining softly under the lights. When she passed the janitorial staff, they smiled and nodded with pride. One of them, the elderly night cleaner, Mr. Harris, called out, "You make us proud, girl. Don't let them dim you." She smiled back. "Never, Mr. Harris. Not again." As the week went on, her presence began to transform the office atmosphere. Meetings started with greetings in multiple languages. Translation interns were hired. The global teams felt more connected than ever. And slowly, the walls that divided the executives and service workers began to thin. But beneath the success, trouble brewed. Charles and a few board members weren't done. They saw her rise as a humiliation, a stain on the company's hierarchy. Behind closed doors, they whispered plans to undermine her, to push her out quietly. And Alexander sensed it. One evening, as the city glowed against the glass, Alexander called Amara into his office. She entered carrying a folder of translated proposals. "You wanted to see me, sir?" He looked up, the fatigue in his eyes softened by something else, concern. "Yes. Sit." She hesitated, then sat opposite him. "I've heard rumblings," he said. "Some of the board members think your appointment was impulsive, that it's controversial." Amara's expression didn't change. "I assumed it would be." "I won't let them touch your position," he continued, leaning forward. "You have my word." Her gaze met his. "I don't need protection, Mr. Whitestone. Just fairness." He smiled faintly. "You're tougher than I thought." She shrugged lightly. "You taught me to be." He laughed softly. Then silence settled between them, the kind that hums with unspoken truths. For a moment, his usual confidence slipped away. "Amara," he said quietly, "the night you translated that meeting, I realized how blind I've been, how small my world really was." Her brow softened. "We all live in cages, sir. Yours just happens to be made of glass." He looked at her for a long moment. Then, almost whispering, "Do you ever regret saving me?" She smiled gently. "No, I'd regret not saving myself." Their eyes held for a second too long, a fleeting, dangerous flicker of understanding. And then the phone rang, shattering it. He turned away, clearing his throat. "We'll continue this later." She nodded and left. But as the door closed behind her, Harper entered from the adjoining hallway. "Sir," she said quietly, "you need to see this." They placed a folder on his desk. Inside were copies of leaked emails, internal communications from Charles and two board members. They'd been coordinating with rival firms, planning to leak Amara's personnel file to the press, to frame her as an unqualified diversity hire who had deceived her way into the role. Alexander's pulse quickened. They wouldn't dare. Harper met his gaze grimly. "They already have. The story's going live tomorrow morning." Meanwhile, across town, Amara walked home beneath the soft drizzle of city rain. She didn't know yet what awaited her, but she did feel the shift in the air, a tension she couldn't name. She looked up at the skyscrapers that glowed above her, each window a piece of a world she had fought to enter. For the first time in years, she whispered not in another language but in English. "Please, God, don't let this be taken from me." She didn't know who was listening. But she would soon find out how far power would go to protect itself, and how far truth could shine, even in darkness. She lied to everyone. That's the headline. The following morning, chaos rippled through Whitestone Holdings. Phones buzzed, screens flashed, whispers spread like wildfire. The city's top business paper had published an explosive exposé titled, "The Maid Who Fooled the Billionaire: How a Janitor Walked into Power." By the time Alexander arrived, the building's glass lobby was already thick with murmurs. Did you read it? She never went to Harvard like they said. Apparently she faked her resume. I knew something was off. Amara's photo, snapped at a gala the previous week, was everywhere. Her face looked almost defiant under the bold, cruel headline. She stood in the elevator alone, gripping the folded newspaper. Her chest felt tight, her pulse rapid. She hadn't lied, but the story twisted truth into scandal. Claiming shy, he had exaggerated her credentials, that she was a linguistic fraud, that her promotion was an emotional decision by a guilt-ridden billionaire. The worst part wasn't the story itself, it was how quickly people believed it. On the top floor, Alexander slammed his fist on the conference table. Who leaked this? Harper flinched, but answered firmly. We traced it. Charles Denton. He sent Amara's file to a journalist last week. Alexander's eyes blazed. Get him in here, now! When Charles arrived, he looked unruffled, sipping coffee like it was just another Tuesday. Alex, relax, he said smoothly. The damage control team will handle it. Besides, the story isn't technically false. Not false? Alexander's voice was a growl. She has degrees in linguistics and economics. I verified them myself. Sure, Charles said with a lazy shrug. But she didn't work in the field. Public perception's what matters. You gave a maid a boardroom seat, and people don't like that kind of fairy tale. Alexander stepped closer, fury radiating off him. You destroyed someone's life to make a point? Charles's smile didn't falter. I protected the company from embarrassment. Don't confuse loyalty with cruelty. Loyalty? Alexander hissed. You're fired. Charles froze. You can't? I just did. Get out. But even as Charles left, the damage was spreading too fast to contain. Investors demanded answers. Emails poured in from shareholders. The board called an emergency meeting, and Amara, the quiet maid turned miracle worker, found herself cornered. By noon, reporters swarmed the front of the building. Miss Lewis, are the allegations true? Did you fake your academic history? Are you in a relationship with Alexander Whitestone? The last question hit like a slap. She froze, face burning. No, she said firmly, but her voice was drowned out by the frenzy. She escaped through a side door, her heels clicking against the marble, her eyes shining with tears she refused to let fall. Upstairs, Alexander watched the news unfold on the office TV, Amara's image flashing beside cruel speculation. Something in him broke. He turned to Harper. Prepare a press conference. I'll speak in an hour. Sir, your PR team advised against. I don't care. His tone was final. This isn't about image anymore. At the same time, Amara sat alone in the staff lounge, the same room she'd eaten lunch in when no one knew her name. Her phone vibrated relentlessly. Friends from old classes, journalists, even family. Everyone wanted her voice. But what could she say? The truth didn't matter to people who preferred scandal. She stared at her trembling hands. The quiet grace she always carried felt distant now. Then she whispered softly, switching languages without thinking. French first, then Arabic, then Swahili. Each phrase meant the same. They can take my title. They can't take my truth. She rose, wiped her tears, and walked out. Not toward the elevator, but the lobby. If they wanted her voice, they would hear it. The press conference room was overflowing. Cameras, reporters, microphones everywhere. Alexander stood at the podium, every lens aimed at him. His tie was gone, sleeves rolled up, the billionaire mask stripped away. He took a breath. You've all read the story, so let me make something clear. Flashbulbs flickered. Amara Lewis didn't fool anyone. She saved this company when none of you could. She didn't lie about her education. She didn't cheat her way here. The only deception was mine, thinking worth could ever be measured by a resume or by wealth. Reporters whispered. Some looked stunned. She earned her position by proving that humanity and brilliance don't need validation from privilege. If this company, or this city, has a problem with that, then it's our shame, not hers. He paused, emotion tightening his voice. If you're looking for a story, here's one. A woman spoke 9 languages and built bridges where billionaires built walls. That's who she is. He stepped back, voice steady. If you can't respect that, you can write me down as the villain who learned too late what value truly means. The room went silent. Then a soft voice rose from the back. "You're not the villain." Every head turned. Amara stood in the doorway. Her posture was calm, elegant, unbroken. She walked toward the stage, the crowd parting around her. Standing beside him, she faced the cameras. "Mr. Whitestone speaks the truth," she said, voice clear. "But I don't need his defense. I stand here not as a maid or an executive or a symbol. I'm a woman who refused to stay silent." She looked straight into the cameras. "And for every person watching who's been mocked for where they came from, remember this: your voice can still save empires." For a long heartbeat, the room was still. Then applause began. Hesitant at first, then building, like rain swelling into a storm. Alexander turned to her. "You didn't have to do that." She smiled faintly. "Yes, I did. Because truth isn't truth until it's spoken." That night, as the news aired, the headlines changed. "Billionaire defends former maid, calls out class discrimination." Amara Lewis, the 9-language prodigy who rewrote corporate power. The tide was turning. The smear campaign collapsed under the weight of her calm dignity. But Alexander knew this wasn't over. The world had heard her voice, and now so had he. And something deeper had begun to stir between them, something neither of them could yet name. The following days brought a kind of silence that felt earned. Whitestone Holdings, once a place of cold marble and colder hearts, began to hum with a strange warmth. Employees smiled when they saw Amara pass by. Conversations stopped being whispers of gossip and became nods of respect. For the first time since she'd stepped into the building, she wasn't invisible. Yet Amara didn't bask in the attention. Xiao Yi moved quietly, still dressing in modest skirts and buttoned blouses, still eating lunch in the staff lounge with the janitors and receptionists. But when she spoke, even the highest executives listened. Alexander watched this change with a mix of awe and guilt. He'd seen her humiliated, mocked, and torn apart by his own carelessness, and now she was rebuilding the company from within, with grace, not vengeance. Every move she made was deliberate, dignified, unshakable. But the cost of his redemption weighed heavily on him. He hadn't slept properly in weeks. One evening, after most of the building had emptied, Alexander found Amara still in the conference room. The skyline outside shimmered, a wash of golds and silvers under the night's drizzle. She was reviewing a stack of proposals, brow furrowed in concentration. "You're still here," he said softly. She looked up but didn't smile. "So are you." He took a breath, then walked closer. "Amara, I owe you more than an apology." She set her pen down. "You already apologized." "No," he shook his head. "I said the words, but I didn't understand them until now." Amara tilted her head, waiting. "I spent years believing power meant being feared," he said. "My father taught me that. He said compassion was weakness, but when I saw you that night, when you spoke those languages, I realized what strength actually looks like. You didn't shout, you didn't fight back, you just stood there, unshaken." Amara's eyes softened, though she said nothing. Alexander's voice grew quiet. "You saved my company. But more than that, you saved me from becoming him. From becoming a man with everything. And no soul left." A silence fell. Rain began tapping softly against the glass. Amara turned to face him fully. "Do you know what I've learned, Mr. Whitestone?" He met her gaze. "What's that?" "That forgiveness isn't about making someone feel better. It's about freeing yourself from the hurt they caused." He nodded slowly. "Have you forgiven me?" Her eyes searched his for a long moment. "I think I'm learning to—" Something fragile flickered between them then. Not romance, not yet. Something deeper. Recognition. Two souls that had seen the worst of each other and still found reason to stay in the same room. The next morning brought an even bigger shift, a televised shareholders' meeting. Reporters lined the front rows, waiting for any hint of scandal or triumph. Amara sat near the stage, modestly dressed but radiating calm authority. When Alexander stepped up to the microphone, the room hushed. "Today," he began, "Whitestone Holdings takes a new direction. Effective immediately, we are launching the Global Language Inclusion Program to support and recruit multilingual talent from underserved communities worldwide. It was inspired by someone sitting in this very room. Cameras panned to Amara. She didn't move, didn't smile, only blinked slowly, a tear glinting before she quickly brushed it away. Alexander continued. For years, this company measured success in numbers. But real success, he said, looking directly at her now, is found in the people who remind us of our humanity. The applause was thunderous. But beneath it all, Amara felt something more intimate. Relief. The kind that came from knowing her struggle hadn't been for nothing. Later that evening, as the building emptied once again, Amara stepped onto the rooftop terrace. The city lights glowed below her, each one a tiny pulse of life. She heard footsteps behind her. Beautiful view, Alexander said, joining her. It's quieter up here, she replied. Almost like the city forgets to breathe for a while. He chuckled softly. You always say things like that. Like what? Things that make the world sound gentler than it is. She smiled faintly. Someone has to. A pause stretched between them, the kind that carried unspoken things. Regret, gratitude, perhaps even affection. Finally, Alexander said, I want you to take the position permanently, head of global communications. You've earned it. Amara turned to him. You don't need my permission to do what's right. No, he said quietly, but I want your forgiveness to mean something. Her lips parted, surprised, softened. You already made it mean something. She extended her hand. Thank you, Mr. Whitestone. He hesitated, then took it. But instead of the cold, businesslike handshake he was known for, his grip was gentle, reverent even. Thank you, Amara, he said, his voice almost a whisper, for saving far more than money. That night, as Amara left the building, she passed the same security guard who used to nod at her silently when she was just the maid. Evening, Miss Lewis, he said with a proud smile. She smiled back. Evening, Marcus. As she stepped into the cool night air, she looked up at the gleaming white stone tower, the same building where she had once been invisible. Now, it stood as a monument to her resilience. And though her heart still carried the scars of humiliation, it also carried something far brighter, the quiet knowledge that she had changed not just a company, but a man, and perhaps even the idea of power itself. The city awoke to whispers of change. It had been 3 months since the scandal, 3 months since Amara's name had been on every business headline in New York. And yet, in those few months, everything about Whitestone Holdings and Alexander Whitestone himself had transformed. The cold, metallic chill that used to define the company had softened. Laughter echoed in the hallways now. Employees stopped rushing like ghosts. There were community programs, internship drives, language inclusion workshops, all funded by Alexander's new initiative. And at the heart of it all was Amara Lewis, not as a maid, not as a token success story, but as a vieux. Ice, calm, intelligent, and deeply respected. Her office was modest but warm, with books stacked neatly and sunlight spilling across her desk. Her old cleaning uniform hung framed on the wall, a reminder not of servitude but of how far she had come. That morning she prepared for a board presentation. It was her final proposal before the launch of Whitestone's Global Bridges program, an initiative connecting companies across languages and cultures using advanced AI linguistics. Her idea. As she rehearsed her notes, she felt a quiet presence in the doorway. Alexander stood there, sleeves rolled, no tie, a far cry from the man who once barked orders and mocked mistakes. Amara, he said softly, leaning against the frame. You ready? She nodded. More than ever. He smiled faintly. Good. You always are. She gathered her files, but before stepping past him, she paused. You look different today. He raised a brow. Different how? Human, she teased gently. He laughed, shaking his head. Coming from you, I'll take that as a compliment. Then, quieter. You're the reason I'm learning to be one. She didn't reply, just met his eyes for a moment, something unspoken passing between them, and walked toward the boardroom. The presentation began. Amara spoke clearly, confidently, moving between slides, data, and stories of communities worldwide. But it wasn't the figures that held the room. It was her presence. Language, she said, isn't just communication. It's dignity. It's connection. It's how we say to someone, I see you. She paused, eyes scanning the room. Executives, board members, investors. For years, I scrubbed these floors, and not one person saw me. Not really. But when someone finally listened, the world changed. Not because of me, but because they chose to understand. Her voice wavered just slightly, then steadied again. That's what this program is about. Understanding. That's what builds bridges stronger than any deal. When she finished, the room was silent, the kind of silence that means something sacred had just been said. Then applause erupted, slow and powerful, spreading like a wave. Alexander stood in the back, clapping with the rest, eyes glistening. Later that day, as the event ended and the reporters packed up, Amara walked out into the garden terrace where the city skyline stretched endlessly before her. She heard his footsteps again, slow and careful. Didn't think you'd leave without saying goodbye, Alexander said softly. She smiled, turning toward him. I wasn't leaving, just breathing. He nodded, stepping beside her. For a moment, they stood in silence, wind carrying the faint hum of the city far below. You're leaving the company soon, aren't you? He asked. She hesitated. I am. He looked down. Where will you go? There's a foundation in Ghana starting a program for multilingual education in rural schools, she said. They need someone to help build their curriculum. I think that's where I'm meant to be next. He nodded slowly, the words catching somewhere in his throat. They're lucky to have you. She turned toward him, eyes soft. You'll be fine, Alexander. You've already changed more than you think. He tried to smile, but it trembled. Still feels like I'm losing something I never deserved to keep. Amara's expression gentled. You're not losing. You're learning to let go. A pause. Long, heavy, but beautiful. He reached into his pocket and handed her a small envelope. Something for you. Inside was a letter of recommendation, signed by every board member, and a personal note at the bottom in his handwriting. For the woman who taught me what wealth really means. Amara's lips parted in quiet shock. She blinked back tears. Alexander. He shook his head. Don't thank me. Just promise me one thing. Wherever you go, don't let anyone silence that voice again. She smiled faintly. I won't. Then, in a whisper, almost like a prayer, and you, don't forget what it feels like to listen. Weeks later, Alexander stood on that same terrace alone. The city glowed beneath him. A cool wind brushed his face. Amara was gone, off to Ghana, her message spreading far beyond his world of steel and glass. He'd received her postcard that morning, a photograph of a classroom filled with smiling children and the words written in looping script. They're learning French and English now, and laughter in every language. He smiled, really smiled, for the first time in years. Then he folded the postcard carefully and slipped it into his jacket. As he turned to leave, the wind carried her voice through memory, gentle, resolute, forever echoing in him. The world doesn't need you to be powerful, Alexander. It needs you to be kind. And for once, he felt like he finally understood.